Hello and welcome to episode 13 of TE Present Teacher. And today we are going to be talking about problem-based learning. It's the other PBL. And problem-based learning has been around in schools and in curricula in India for a long time, probably much longer than project-based learning. So let's get right into it. And today, for talking about problem-based learning, we have Ritu. Hi, Ritu.
Hi.
So let's just get into it. Um, Problem-based learning. What is it?
So, like the name suggests, problem-based learning is basically a pedagogical approach that pushes students to drive their own learning by presenting them with a problem. And here, a problem means something that is based in real life and something that is complex. It doesn't have a straightforward one word, one sentence answer. It's a complex problem that requires a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different pieces of knowledge to be put together to solve it. And problem based learning is basically that approach which gives students a problem, gives them the tools to solve them, the knowledge to solve them. Um, yeah.
Okay. I know that problem-based learning has been going on in India, especially in the schools, for a long time. So I can't really call it a fad, but it seems to be kind of used in a, fad-like manner that, okay, hey, let's this time try problem-based learning. So is it just something that is, different for the students to do, or do you think there is some concrete, pedagogy that we can talk about?
The way it's being done currently in schools, it is being adopted more of as a fad. But if done right, there are certain robust pedagogical underpinnings to this approach. So, as always, I think the point to keep in mind for any educator, for any school leader or head of department in a school is that there has to be a balance between doing it for doing something different versus ensuring that learning is happening by understanding the pedagogy underlying it. Mm, But there are definitely positives to this approach. Um, the biggest positive is the context that this kind of an approach creates for students. So, like I said earlier, problem based learning presents students with a real life problem, um, which they then have to solve through their lessons. And this creates good context for students to understand what they're learning in school, how that can be applied to their real life, to the outside world. Um, and context has shown to be extremely useful for learning. We've spoken about long-term memory several times before, and long-term memory is basically that part of our mind where memories are stored, and they're stored in the form of connections. The stronger the connections are, the more the connections are, the more deeply memory gets embedded in our mind. And so, once context is given, students have something to connect these pieces of knowledge to their real life, and learning is definitely deeper.
Right. I think that's a great point. And context will what you're essentially saying in a layperson's term would also be that this context will help students remember more and probably even faster because of the context and those connections being made hopefully quicker and more easily. And I think another thing that probably context can do, and I'm just thinking out loud here, is the context of a real world problem is what would get my attention is what would keep me motivated. Hey, there's something that needs to be solved in the world. Can I be that person who can solve it, or can I at least give it a try? So I get what you're saying. I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, but I'm sure that, like like with any other pedagogical approach, we have to be careful about a few things. If it's done right, it's great, done very well, and it is very helpful for the students. I do understand also because of the number of schools we visit, it kind of can also become an event in the sense of, hey, we'll do problem-based learning for these 2 weeks, and at the end of it, we'll show you how we have solved the problem. And that may not work best for the learning of the student. I mean, it can be an event at the school, and that's great. But we have to know and we have to maybe, admit that that is not going to be the best case scenario for the learning for the students. So speaking of learning, I think there would be, certain kinds of skills or knowledge that you gain would work better with problem-based learning. And at some times you would also see limitations in problem-based learning for certain kind of skills and knowledge development. And this is a general question with, almost all pedagogies. So I just wanted to ask you about that.
As always, whatever pedagogical approach a teacher chooses to take, the first step is the learning outcome. So, mm, if a teacher wants to use problem-based learning as the approach, uh, he or she must first break down the concept into what the students need to learn. Um, Problem-based learning is something that would probably work better in higher grades in middle school and high school. And at that point, to solve any sort of problem, students need foundational knowledge. And by foundational knowledge, I mean basics of that concept need to be known to students. And so the first few learning outcomes within that topic would be focused on building students' understanding, that they'd be able to understand something, they'd be able to explain something, they'd be able to define certain terms. Those are the kinds of skills, or those are the kinds of knowledge pieces we want students to build right in the beginning. And that is what the learning outcomes in the beginning should focus on. Now, when it is about knowledge building, and again, we've also talked about this before, that no kind of problem solving, no kind of critical thinking can happen without foundational knowledge first being built. For that part of learning, taking a problem-based approach may not work very well, because at this stage, students need direct instruction. Students need very clear understanding of certain facts, of certain maybe even procedures that they need to follow, which can't happen through problem-based learning. Maybe if we had unlimited time and resources, that would be okay, but that's not what reality is. And so direct instruction is probably a great starting point for a problem-based learning approach, where you build students' knowledge with a direct instruction, with several direct instruction classes.
Right. I think I can understand that. And again, I know you said it's not great for the lower grades because probably the knowledge base is not that high. And that just got me to thinking that maybe even in the lower grades, when I'm learning how to do the process of, say, a long division or an addition or subtraction with a carryover, etc., and all of that, that's a procedural skill that I'm trying to build in a student. And maybe problem-based learning there is not going to be ideal. However, if I want to see how the students can apply their understanding of the concepts of division as to when you divide, when you want to distribute, when you want to share, that's when you divide, when you multiply, when you add, when you subtract. Maybe that is where problem-based learning would probably be helpful. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Another example that comes to mind is we've done a course called Forensic Science with students over many, many years. And the problem that is presented to them is a crime that they have to solve. So there's a crime scene, they're given some facts of the case, and they have to solve this problem. If we define that as a problem. And so they know that that's the final aim, but it's not possible for us to take a problem-based approach for them to understand, for example, complicated things like how do you find the type of the blood that they found at the crime scene. And for that, direct instruction is the way we go. We actually explain to them what the components of blood are. We use visuals, we use discussions, but it is mostly conversations. It's mostly reading and discussions. And there is a lot of time spent on that because building that foundation knowledge is important, while knowing that the ultimate aim is to solve that problem. So starting with giving them the context is good, but diving immediately into letting them solve the problem is probably not the way to go.
Hi, we have developed an amazing tool to help teachers plan their lessons, TEPS, or Things Education's pedagogical strategies. TEPS helps teachers by reducing the time that they spend on planning lessons. TEPS also helps you if you want to try a different pedagogical approach to teaching. So, if you want to know how to teach a topic in a project-based or inquiry-based or even constructivist learning approach, TEPS is for you. TEPS helps even seasoned teachers with fresh ideas on how to teach specific topics. So, scan the QR code on the screen or visit teps.school and join a community of empowered educators. Great teaching begins with steps.
So given that building knowledge or skill is so important to be able to solve a problem. So essentially, it's like, okay, I have the knowledge, I know what the basics are. I'm going to try and apply this, my knowledge or my learning, to a real world situation. That's how I'm kind of thinking about it. And that brings me to the next point where a lot of the problem based learning problems that are given to students are, when you say real world problems, they're not like the forensic science example that you used. They are actually real world problems that are existing today for society, for humankind. And that there is merit in doing that, that, hey, it's good to get the students, be aware of these problems that exist, see what they can do about it in their limited capacity. But that is fine. But then thinking of the fact that, okay, it's a problem-based learning approach. So the students need to solve this problem. Now, there are humans who are at the peak of expertise and experience in these fields who are trying to solve this problem. How are we expecting students to solve this?
So there are two things again that I think teachers need to keep in mind when they are choosing a problem and when they are taking a problem-based approach. One is that I think real life problems, like we said, real life complex problems are at the core of problem-based learning. But framing the problem or limiting the problem in a way that is right for the student's level is probably the most important step here. We can't tell students that they have to solve the problem of plastic use across the world as a part of sustainable living, for example, because that is something that no one has been able to do. Experts in the field are struggling to understand how to solve this problem. But there are paths within it. There are problems, sub problems within that larger problem. That is something that students can start thinking about. Um, for example, just identifying what are the different kinds of plastics that we use in our school every day, and maybe coming up with a strategy to limit that use is a narrow enough problem that they can tackle it. They can feel very motivated by the fact that they're helping their immediate surroundings, their school. Um, and it's all accessible. They can go, they can look, they can feel, they can talk to people. So that is a problem that they can tackle. And I'm specifically using the word tackle because it's not a problem that they can solve.
Right.
And that's the second thing that teachers should definitely keep in mind, that students are not going to solve the problem, and that should never be the aim. The aim should be to understand the steps of problem solving, build skills of critical thinking, know how to increase your own knowledge base if you're struggling to figure out a certain aspect of the problem. And that is where your learning of science, of maths, of chemistry, whatever aspect of sustainability, for example, you're dealing with, that is where the learning is going to happen. So it has to be very carefully planned out. It can't be a very open-ended problem that students just go and solve, because it's going to be extremely demotivating for them. And then the teacher really doesn't have any control over what aspects of learning need to be really focused on. So,
Right.
yeah.
That reminds me actually of a problem that there was a student was trying to solve, and the bigger problem that he wanted to solve was to clean up a lake in his neighborhood. And this is in Bangalore, so I mean, whatever lakes that remain need to be cleaned. And when I asked him, when I was talking to him, he said, okay, you know what? First thing I'm going to do is go and look at which birds are coming to this lake. And I said, yes, brilliant. Just do that much. At least that will give you an idea of, what kind of flora fauna is getting affected. And then he wanted to compare this to some research that had happened 20 years ago. So you're saying that I need to establish that there is a change and this is what I'm going to do. So even though the bigger problem of, cleaning up the lake or keeping lakes clean or even keeping lakes alive for that matter is a much bigger problem in Bangalore, I think he was doing a very cool thing as a small step contributing to solving the bigger problem. And what you said, critical thinking, problem solving, how do I build my knowledge? All of that gets weaved in, even if it's such a small, I wouldn't say a small problem, but it's a small part of a bigger problem. So I get what you're saying completely. And the other thing that you kind of mentioned was about motivation. I think you just mentioned it once that, students will get demotivated. And I think it goes back to the previous point that you were kind of making, that the problem that needs to be given should be given at the right level. If I'm guessing it's too easy, the students are going to solve it. Engagement motivation is going to, dip almost immediately after it's been solved. And if it's too difficult or it's too big a problem, and even if it's a big problem and not broken down, motivation can drop, right? Because you're not going to be engaged enough and you're going to say, hey, I just don't know enough about this. I don't know what I can do. So I get what you're saying completely. So as a last word on this, should problem-based learning be used in schools?
It's a good pedagogical approach to use for sure, for all the reasons that we mentioned: context, motivation, engagement, deeper learning. But with keeping in mind that problem-based learning cannot be the starting point of any learning. Procedural skills, foundational knowledge, these are aspects of learning that, with the speed and the vastness of the syllabus that we have in India, we can't really use these approaches to build those kind of procedural skills and conceptual knowledge. So direct instruction, well-paced direct instruction that has enough checks for understanding, involves students enough in conversations, in maybe small activities, is very good for as a starting point of problem-based learning. But if we want to bring in problem-based learning as a more widespread pedagogical approach, there is definite need for a lot of teacher professional development to understand how to frame the learning outcomes, how to decide the pacing of the learning outcomes, how much time to spend on which aspect, and mainly how to support students through that problem solving phase that they'll go through, and what kind of skills they need to build while ensuring that academic learning is not compromised. So there's definite need for professional development, and problem-based learning can be used as an approach with all of these conditions in place.
So I get it. And you're saying that just knowing as a teacher or an educator, knowing when I need to stop and help the students out with building some knowledge, whether it's giving direct instruction, modeling something for them, modeling a skill for them, or even just telling them how to go look for the information somewhere and supporting them with that. So knowing this and knowing when to step back and let the students actually go ahead with the process of solving this problem, I think that would be an important expertise to have as a teacher also when you're in a problem-based learning classroom. And yes, I think a big thing that should be a takeaway for all of us is that it is okay to combine problem-based learning with other pedagogical approaches. Not just okay, it's probably the best and the optimal way to go given the constraints of our school system. Thanks a lot, Ritu. I think this was great. And we did explore some aspects of problem-based learning. What we haven't done is gone deeper into how do we approach problem-based learning in the classroom, which is something that we will be doing in the near future. But for now, thanks a lot everyone for watching, and we'll be back with another video in a few days' time. See you.